There are a few things that I get as excited about as Rounder Records. It's absolutely my favorite record label of all time, and has certainly had a massive impact in my musical trajectory. The releases on Rounder are just absolutely unparalleled. In this picture, just a portion of my CD collection, and it's all Rounder titles right there. So definitely it takes up the bulk of my collection, and that's no coincidence. Well, last year I did a video celebrating their 50th anniversary, sharing some of my favorite titles. Now today we take it a step further. We go directly to the source. I'm so thrilled that I got to sit down and interview Bill Nowlin, one of the three founders of Rounder Records. He has a brand new book coming out in a few days from when this video will be posted. It's titled Vinyl Ventures, and it's of course about his 50 years with Rounder Records. It was just such a treat to interview him. He talks about the book, of course, but also just Rounder Records in general, and we get to know some of those iconic releases we all love so dearly in a little more detail. So join me. This is going to be a fun, exciting interview.
Well, thank you. Really a huge thank you for doing this interview. I'm so excited to get to talk to you and discuss the new book, but also a few things out of the book maybe. But this is a dream come true. Because, I mean, I grew up seeing those colored spin, the sides of the Rounder CDs, and I was always, as a kid, before I even knew what was on them, I was, oh, that's so cool to see like the different colors. And I have truly grown up around Rounder Records, and now I think I have about 900 total titles in my catalog. The ones that I don't have are the ones that are going for like, 40 or 50 bucks or more a title that are really hard to get. There's like a few from the World Anthology of music that is like really hard to get now, that I want to get. But Rounder has I don't think there's a single other entity in my musical life that has had such a profound impact as Rounder. So this is like really an amazing thing to get to talk to you.
You might well have one of the larger collections of people that didn't work for Rounder.
Well, I tell you, I stayed the night at John Bichard's house once when I was in Boston.
You took all his.
No, I looked at his shelf and I said, oh my goodness. I said, this is the only person I know other than myself that has more copies of Rounder than I do. And I was looking through some of them and I said, man, I didn't even know some of these existed. So that was just, I couldn't believe. I was really just in heaven there seeing all of his collection. But
I'd have to admit that most of the numbers I have memorized, at least the first 1,000 or so. But every once in a while, there's a record that comes up and I said, did we do that?
Well, and then, like when I shop at music stores, for example, in Chicago, there's one I really love, Reckless Records, and they always, they sometimes will put Rounder label with some of the subsidiary labels. They don't differentiate, and so I say that's Rounder, but technically it is, but not exactly. So jumping right in, 50 years ago, I'm just curious, when you three started this, did you think that you would be celebrating an amazing 50th anniversary in the future, or was it kind of something that you just started and thought you'd see where it takes off, but no expectations, so to speak? Or was it kind of somewhere in the middle that you thought it would be there for a while, but maybe you didn't know how long? Or
when we started, I mean, we were record collectors, and one of the reasons that we started is simply because there were some groups that we wanted records of that didn't exist yet.
Sure.
We talked to a couple of small labels and said, how about you put out a record by this group? And they said, well, if you make the tape, we'll consider it. And at that point, I guess, started thinking, if we're going to make the tape, maybe we put out ourselves, but we didn't really start it as a business.
Yeah.
We didn't really start it as anything that we thought was necessarily even going to grow.
Right.
We were all in academic careers, all graduate students, and thinking we would go, to the extent we thought, into academic life. I started being a political science professor within 30 days of when the first record came out. It was just something we just started doing. We just put out a couple records. It was a full year before we put out the third record because we didn't have a business plan. We didn't have any sense of this being an operation that would have anything of any particular lasting significance. Within a year, though, we changed quite a bit. We put out 3 albums our second year, and then we put out 19 albums our third year. By that point, we clearly had an idea that something was going on.
Sure. Well, that actually explains a lot right there. I'm curious if it was you specifically behind the 4000 series, or was that like a joint decision between the three of you to start doing like some more politically oriented?
No, they were all everything we did was jointly decided.
Yeah.
My interest in political science had maybe nothing to do with the fact that we started that series.
Oh, wow. Okay. All right.
We were all actively involved in some of the political movements of the day. 2 of us had been conservative Republicans, actually.
Oh, wow.
Growing up, and myself and Marion. Ken was from a left-wing family in New York City, but things like the civil rights movement and the Vietnam War kind of convinced Marion and myself to kind of a natural gravitation to what was called the counterculture at the time.
Right.
But I mean, the first album we put out was a women's liberation rock band album. It was the first women's liberation music album that was ever recorded.
Right. Well, combining 2 of those ideas, I'm curious how much of a role being in Boston or in the Boston area had on Rounder. Like, what would have Rounder been like had it been, not in Boston? I know, of course, you worked with a lot of New England people, but I'm just curious, aside from that, specifically how Boston shaped the trajectory of Rounder.
It's hard to know. Ken was from New York City. I'm from the Boston area.
Yeah.
Marion's from down East Maine, a very rural community. But she came to Boston to go to school at Northeastern University.
Sure.
The fact that Boston was, and that's why Ken and I were college roommates at Tufts. Boston being a university city with dozens of universities, a lot of students there, and I think a lot of interest in different things, whether it be musically or artistically, politically, socially. There's a lot of, it was an era in the late 60s of a lot of social change, and I think we were just part of it. If we had been living in, I won't say any place because it might sound like I'm disparaging it, but if we were living someplace else, we might not have had the same influences.
Right. Well, and tell me about, I saw your name on the CD of Jospeh Spence in Boston. Tell me what that was like to bring him to Boston. I would have loved to have seen that, man.
Well, we brought him to Boston because there was 2 or 3 active series, a folklore series, a bluegrass series, a blues society, different organizations that grew up to bring in different kinds of music. And we brought him up there. The album that we did, the first album we did, we actually recorded in the Bahamas.
Right.
Scott Billington and I took a trip down there to Nassau and went and visited him and did the recording there. And his very unique personality, but very easy to get along with.
Oh, great. Well, I said about one of his albums on one of my other videos that he's got the most infectious style. I mean, you just, it grabs you, and it's just his pure joy that he expresses when he plays. I mean, I've never heard anyone have so much enthusiasm to play a song. It's just unreal. How did you become the main kind of de facto person for all those amazing reissues? Was that something that you would kind of come to the table wanting to do from the beginning, or what led up to you being behind all those amazing historical reissues?
You mean me, myself?
Yeah, well, I see it's always listed as project coordinator.
No, it's true. Because I started as a college professor, I was kind of rooted to the area. I had to teach 3 days a week, for instance, during that academic year. I also just personally, I think I liked being in the background a little bit more.
Sure.
So whereas Ken and Marion were out more in the recording studio or out visiting people that might do radio shows or
Right.
that sort of thing, I was more in the back room doing the royalties accounting, making sure the artists got paid, taking care of a lot of the business details. And that kind of was a natural connection to some of the reissues.
Yeah, gotcha.
Because I didn't have to go out. These were recordings that were made years and years ago.
Yeah.
A very good friend named Mark Wilson was a graduate student at Harvard at the time in the department. And he and I put together many of the early reissues. Now, the very first one that we did was Blind Alfred Reed, a fiddle player from West Virginia. The album's called How Can a Poor Man Stand Such Times and Live? And Ken, Marion, and myself all went to visit his son and his daughter-in-law in West Virginia. So it's not as though they weren't actively involved in albums, but I was more doing a lot of the paperwork and organizing the tapes and working with Mark to see some of the notes get written and all.
Yeah. Was there a specific project that you wanted to see reissued right away out of all those? Was there one that really was like urgent for you to get out to public listeners?
No, not really. There was another reissue series, or a repackaging, I guess, that I think you alluded to, the Alan Lomax collection.
Right.
Now, that was something that we started early on. In our first year, we had visited and spent a considerable amount of time at the Archive of Folk Song at the Library of Congress. And we were in touch with Alan Lomax right away, but it was more than 15 years later before we got his attention. And started putting out those series. And when that happened, I was kind of the point person on most of those as well.
Right. Well, and I think that you had mentioned to me before is that there was actually a lot more from those that haven't been released yet. I mean, and those, it's already a mammoth collection as it is. I mean, that's...
We put out about 100 albums from that collection, but as time went on, we started near the beginning of the CD era.
Yeah.
And as time went on, things changed, and they decided to start doing it themselves as well.
Okay. I see.
So they have continued to put out new releases in conjunction with the Library of Congress and Smithsonian.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. I was talking to Scott Billington once, actually, last year, and he mentioned that sometimes there was. Well, I was curious about kind of like a commercial standpoint by this, because and he answered those questions, but he said sometimes there would be a surprise, like the Masters of Turkish Music, he said, sold really well. So what was another like kind of surprise that you had with all these reissues? What was another one that was really popular?
That one did do well, and I don't really know why. Maybe I've just caught people's imagination or something. I'm trying to think. Some of them were well-known groups in the 20s and 30s, like Gid Tanner and the Skillet Lickers.
Oh, sure.
And we were real happy to be able to put out a couple of theirs. Mark Wilson helped us a lot on some of those early organizing. Then we worked with, of course, many record collectors around the country, like Dick Spotswood, for instance.
Yeah.
Helped us bring some of those together. The whole early days of Bluegrass series that ended up being a dozen albums that came through because of Dick's inspiration.
Yeah, I want to talk to you about that in a second, about that collection. But first with Mark, his specialty is fiddle music, right?
He played fiddle, and he was especially interested in old-time fiddle. Yeah,
as I saw, like on some of those, like the Fiddle Music of Kentucky, and some of those records, I still see his name on there a lot.
He also pioneered the whole Cape Breton series that we did.
Oh, right.
Maybe 20 albums, maybe 25, 30 albums from Nova Scotia, which is mostly Scottish fiddle music.
Right. Yeah. Oh, so those are really incredible. Absolutely. Well, Yeah, the early years of bluegrass was on my list because I noticed, for a long time I was thinking, man, why aren't these being reissued? Why aren't they digitized? And then last year you solved that, not only with the reissue but with an amazing book with them too. So I'm curious if you can hint at, or even just say if there's any more projects like that in the future to take some of those old vinyl only copies and make them digitized and more accessible.
That remains to be seen.
Uh-huh.
We did sell the company a few years ago,
Right,
so we're
right.
to some extent, well, considerable extent, it's their company,
Yeah,
dependent on the powers that be in Concord.
sure, sure, sure.
We have a couple things. I mean, there's things that we started years and years ago, like the Blue Ridge catalog. It was a small
Yeah.
bluegrass label. We have their masters that we purchased, and they've simply never come out.
Mm.
There's not, I don't know that there's much of a market for them.
Uh-huh.
There may be people like you and me that would be really interested, and hopefully a few of the listeners here. But
Yeah,
I don't know. It's not the kind of thing that would grab their attention. It's the kind of thing
right.
we might be able to talk them into at some point.
Yeah.
But I know Ken's been working on a collection of Hazel Dickens songs from years past. We've had a couple of other projects that come forward that we might have liked to have done, but they just didn't seem to connect at the time.
Yeah. Well, I think you posted, if I'm not mistaken, I think you posted in the Joe Val Facebook group that there was a work on a Joe Val project, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah. Ken has been working a lot on one featuring Joe and Herb Applin together.
Ah, great.
And they
Excellent.
were
Yeah.
really good duo singers, and that's
Right.
been it's been in the works for several years now.
Mm.
It's sort of at the bottom of the list for the sound engineers, and we don't
Yeah.
crack the whip as if we ever did, but we don't have any significant enough influence to edge that along. We're really dependent on goodwill for.
Sure, sure, sure. So how long was the early days of Bluegrass Project sitting, like being
That we did separately. That one is put out by me, actually in
gotcha.
collaboration with the Bluegrass Country Foundation.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
Nonprofit
Right.
in the Washington, D.C. area.
Yeah.
Concord didn't want to do it, and I
Oh, okay.
understand why, because a number of the songs on it are ones that we really could never track down who the owners were.
Oh,
recordings from the 1940s and 1950s
sure.
for the most part.
Yeah.
And so it's a little bit murky in terms of rights, and it's very reasonable that they didn't want to put themselves out on a limb.
Yeah.
If some relative came forward, you could probably easily take care of them. We always were able to.
Right.
But they were a little skittish of it, and I don't blame them. So I just decided I really wanted it to come out, and so I connected with this foundation, and
Sure.
we worked together to get it out. And it's
right.
Raising a little bit of money for them, which is good too.
Yeah, it's always interesting, to see what goes on behind the scenes. Like since I've started working at a music venue, you see so much that goes on behind just a public performance, and then also, like I just got my hands on the Woody Guthrie suitcase box set that you guys put out, and reading that book. It's just amazing to come across something that you have no idea who owns it. I mean, that's like, there's so many details like that behind the scenes that, really are fascinating, that can really slow stuff down too, though. So that was just so fascinating for me to read about that. About that set, having to figure out where those came from.
Yeah, but those were all able to track down pretty easily, and it was just a big undertaking bringing it all together, and then there was a whole book connected with that one also.
Right. So speaking of books, what prompted, other than of course the 50th anniversary, but what was it like to sift through all of your time at Rounder to make this book?
Well, most of it I actually wrote in the year 2008. No particular year. I wasn't looking towards any any anniversary or anything of that sort.
Sure.
I just started doing it. I guess I must have had enough spare time a feeling that we ought to try to get this down while we still can.
Sure.
Still had access to all the filing cabinets, to dozens of filing cabinets where we kept everything we ever did. So most of it was written then. And then, of course, some years ago, as could see the 50th anniversary approaching,
right,
to go back and update it.
Yeah.
And so now it's actually complete through the first 50 years.
Amazing. Yeah. Well, I really hope for 50 more at least.
I don't know if I'll write the sequel. Maybe 120 years old by that time or something. But
maybe I'll write it.
Yeah, okay.
What is your, if I may ask, it's a bad question, but what is your, do you have a favorite release that you've worked on out of all of those amazing releases?
It changes from day to day.
Okay.
I couldn't really, it's the one I listened to last.
Sure. What about?
There have been ones that stood out over the years, and certain artists that have been more enjoyable to work with than others. But you mentioning Jospeh Spence, I hadn't thought about him for quite a while. Weeks and weeks I hadn't thought about him, and so that makes me feel good to know that somebody appreciated him, appreciated his work, and maybe I'll listen to that album this afternoon.
Yeah. What about another artist I really love that I think isn't thought about a lot these days is Howard Armstrong. Did you work with him when he was in Boston too?
Oddly enough, not as much. He had the first recordings that he had done. He wasn't in Boston.
Right.
By the time he came to Boston, I don't think we were working with him anymore.
Yeah, I think he was. Well, and I don't think he was even really recording.
I don't think he was recording
at that performing. Yeah. But man, I love his records. The one on, well, I think two on Flying Fish, and then the one on Rounder.
It was Bruce Kaplan from Flying Fish brought that, and a number of other artists like Norman Blake, for instance.
Sure.
To Rounder, because he joined Rounder at a certain while before he split off to set up Flying Fish on his own.
Right.
And then Flying Fish came back to Rounder after he passed away.
Got it. Back to the previous question, maybe an easier question would be: do you have a favorite reissue project out of all those amazing reissues? Was there one that you were really happy that it got out?
I don't know that I can answer that one either. I mean,
that's okay.
I'm happy to have gotten out the early days of bluegrass music.
Sure.
That was a 10-album set that we got down to 6 compact discs.
Yeah.
I mean, the Blind Alfred Reed album was just fun to work on, to go down and meet his some of his relatives.
Right.
There are, I'd have to even just look at the list to remind myself of some of them.
Yeah.
Working with the Woody Guthrie material was a real treat, certainly.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Oh, some of those there's like some really amazing hidden gems. Like when I picked up the prison songs from Alan Lomax, I said, I have no idea what I'll get into with this, but it was actually stunning. I mean, I couldn't just turn it off. I just loved what, so there's always those hidden gems that, when you least expect it, it just grabs you. It's amazing.
There was another album of prison songs that we did earlier called Wake Up Dead Man.
Yeah, right.
By Bruce Jackson and recorded relatively recently, I guess in the 1960s mostly.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, to close, I want to ask a question of speculation, just to weigh the huge impact. So, of course, we lost so many people in 2020, but for me, one of the biggest was Tony Rice, who I can safely say, if it was not for him, I think I would have lost interest in bluegrass music years ago, and certainly would not be playing guitar. But I'm curious if you could speculate on the trajectory of bluegrass without Tony Rice, what it would have been like had he not been involved in bluegrass music.
That would be a tough question. He came along at the time of our first bluegrass hit, really, which was the album that so many people call by the record number,
right?
044.
Yeah, right.
Instead of the title, J.D. Crowe and the New South.
Right.
He was part of J.D.'s band, and his guitar and his vocals.
Yeah.
J.D. had such a talent for bringing on other people to help front the band.
Right.
And he, one of many. I mean, Keith Whitley later on.
Right.
Many others. But he really brought that one album, still stands out as a really pioneering album. People like Alison Krauss, I believe, has said that was one of her favorite albums growing up.
Oh, for sure, for sure.
And many, many others. I think a really influential album. And we're just so fortunate that we could talk JD into recording for this little record company up in Cambridge, Massachusetts. At the time. And that they decided to go with us instead of maybe one of the other companies that they might have gone with that were based in, say, Virginia or somewhere.
Yeah, well, I think he was, everything was with Rebel, I guess, up till that point.
There had been with Rebel, and there was a company called Lemco that he recorded with out of Lexington, Kentucky.
Right. What do you think? I think I read it in that reissue. I bought that Record Store Day vinyl reissue of that. And I think it's in there where Tony made the comment that, you know, he said it was kind of him that broke that up because he went out to California then. But then he made a very fascinating comment, which I never thought about, which was that I guess people were critical of him for doing that, but then he said that Miles Davis's most famous record, that exact lineup only made one record and then never again. So what do you think about? Do you think there could Tony, as I understood, basically was making the point that there could not have been a second follow-up to that they had said everything they wanted to say in one release. What do you think? Could there have been a second variation of that, or you know, was that like the natural course for them to just do that one and then it played out as it did?
I wish there were another one.
Or
two or three more. I don't know. I mean, that's a nice thing to say in retrospect. I don't have any reason to think they couldn't have done another album or two. Like that. As I said, JD went on to do many successful other albums with other folks, but so did Tony. Went off in a jazz direction, doing some things with David Grisman and all, as you know.
Well, or the one that is like on heavy rotation for me is Plays and Sings Bluegrass. I mean, and then to finally, I didn't realize this until recently, but to realize after all these years that, as I understand that almost all of those were cut on the first take, just real informal. I thought, man, what's informal for him is like, you know, years of rehearsal for everyone else. So.
Imagine what it would be like if he actually worked at it.
Yeah, for real. Oh man, and then it's really sad for me that was his only Grammy nominated record, and I said, man, that should have won. But you know, it's also beautiful because Tony was one of those people that just did not care if it was Grammy winning or not. I mean, I don't think that was his top priority with that album. But yeah, it's just really amazing to hear all these old recordings. So I'm really looking forward to diving into this book, and I can't wait.
You just gave me an idea, actually. There's a thing called the National Registry of Sound Recordings, and I don't believe that 0044 is in the National Registry yet, and it should be. So I'm gonna nominate it.
It should, because I think that Allison actually said that it was the most important recording ever in bluegrass. Now when someone says that, that's some huge words right there, and I don't disagree at all. I mean, my goodness, I think you said in the liner notes that there was a while that you couldn't go to a festival without hearing one of those songs in every set list.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I mean, what a terrific recording for sure. Well, and there was a period there that those guys were on like Kaleidoscope, I think, and some of those ended up being reissued on Rounder, like the Acoustics record, I know, for example.
A number of artists, made the rounds, recorded for one album for another company. We didn't sign artists to 7-album deals or things like that as the major labels did.
Gotcha. Yeah. Oh, and there was also a very fun discussion on the Tony Rice Facebook page about why did his flight guitar case say Tony Rice, One Camp Way. and because he had that stenciled in his guitar case when he flew to Japan, I guess. So
I didn't know that.
yeah, someone that knew him said that he said if it was to get lost, the best place for it to be would go back to Rounder offices. So
yeah, we would have taken care of it.
yeah. Last to close, is there any particular story from the book you're really fond of, or maybe a funny story that didn't make it into the book? Just something, you know, a little anecdote to close.
No, but a funny story or something. But if I were to say what I hope most people get out of the book, it would be the idea that you could start off something, and with the right energy, with the help from enough people, because we got help from an awful lot of people along the way, maybe you can make something. We had no business background at all, and yet we ended up setting up this, what became a fairly large company.
Right.
And our instinct, our drive, our love of the music,
yeah,
and a lot of help from a lot of folks.
Right.
Came together nicely, and things can get done.
Sure. Absolutely. That's, very true. Actually, I forget one last question I forgot, which is, do you think there is still with things like Facebook and YouTube and you know, just the whole world at our fingertips, do you think there is still the possibility for a person to be like an Alan Lomax and go around and still make discoveries? You know, is there still that role, so to speak, in music that to go and search for stuff that hasn't been discovered yet?
There's probably some indigenous music that still is out there, but I was just thinking about this the other day. I don't suspect there's a whole lot. You read every once in a while about a group of 60 people in the Amazon that have just not had a lot of contact with the outside world, but there are very, very few places like that anymore.
Yeah.
Just in the generation before mine, and there were, I mean, radio grew up in the 1920s for the most part, and television came in the 1950s. Computers came in later. There's just so much that happened in the last 100 years.
Right.
So that has penetrated most of the world. Maybe when we get to, maybe the Mars Explorer will find a small colony under the surface.
Oh, I would love that. Yeah. So maybe in a few years, it will be the Rounder issue of Sounds from Space. Oh, right. One last thing. How did Sun Ra, how did that end up on Rounder? I'm so curious about that, because for me, like I see like a pretty consistent lineup in Rounder, and then Sun Ra, it's like, bam, like there's one very interesting outlier there. And I'm thrilled that Sun Ra is on Rounder, but I'm just curious how that came to be.
I don't even remember who it was, but we were in touch with so many people that were interested in offbeat music.
Sure.
Stuff that was off the beaten path.
Right.
And he was certainly different. His music was very different. It took no arm twisting to get us interested to do the couple albums we did. But in the first album we did of Alhaji Baikonti, he's a kora player from the Gambia in Africa.
Right.
We'd never heard of the kora before, and an enthusiastic guy, Mark Pivark, showed up at our house one day and simply with his enthusiasm talked us into it. He'd done the recording. And
wonderful.
So it really just took somebody with a real passion for the music that could convince us of that, infect us with the same passion, and we'd move forward.
Sure. Absolutely. Well, that's wonderful. Well, I think that's a great place to close for today. I'll say lastly that I hope to see you sometime in maybe Tbilisi, Georgia. I'm dying to get back over there, so I hope that maybe we'll see each other somewhere in Georgia someday.
I had planned to be there last spring.
Right.
I had the whole itinerary, how I was going to get past through Istanbul and make the connection.
Sure. I just purchased the vinyl copy of the World Anthology from Georgia, because I haven't heard that yet. So that's in the mail. So I'm excited to hear that. But yeah, the music in Georgia is incredible. The food is really incredible. And then the wine is just no comment. It's very good.
Yeah, okay.
So, well, all right. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. And I can't wait to get my hand on this book. So thank you again. See you later.
Thank you very much, Matt.
You betcha. Have a good day.